Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched a storm tear through a city and yet find one single tree still standing tall, its roots gripping the soil, its branches bruised but not broken? That's faith. That's resilience. That's what we're talking about today. Because the world has witnessed something it can't unsee, something no news anchor can spin, no historian can erase. When the missiles fell, when the skies burned and the world held its breath, they stood unshaken. And now, the world knows what Muslims are made of. They didn't flinch. They didn't fall. They didn't run. When others screamed, they whispered prayers. When the earth trembled beneath their feet, their hearts stayed rooted in the heavens. When the world expected collapse, they stood tall, unshaken, unbreakable, unstoppable. What gives a human being that kind of strength, that kind of power? It's not armor, it's not weapons, it's not numbers, it's belief, it's purpose, it's a connection with something greater than this world. Because when your soul knows why it exists, when your heart is tethered to the eternal, no missile, no force, no fear can unmake you. And this is what the world saw. This is what pierced the headlines and cut through the noise. Men and women, young and old, standing in the rubble, heads bowed in prayer, children smiling despite hunger, mothers wiping tears not with hopelessness, but with grace, fathers walking forward into uncertainty with dignity carved into every step. This is the miracle the world didn't expect. This is the miracle they couldn't silence. You see, steel is forged in fire. Diamonds are formed under pressure. And faith, real faith, it doesn't just survive the storm, it rises in it. These were not ordinary moments. These were defining moments. The kind of moments that mark history, that redefine strength. Because for years, they tried to tell a different story, a story of weakness, of division, of fear. But when the storm hit, when the real test came, it wasn't anger or panic they found in the hearts of Muslims. It was peace. It was conviction. It was that deep, burning knowing that no matter what happens, we don't break, we rise. They fasted as bombs fell. They prayed as sirens screamed. They gave charity with what little was left. They forgave even as they buried their loved ones. That's not weakness. That's not fragility. That's the kind of strength that shakes the foundations of the earth. That's the kind of legacy that echoes for generations. And now the world is watching. The world is waking up to a truth it tried to bury. That behind every scar is a story of power. That behind every tear is a waterfall of courage. That behind every ruined wall is an unshakable soul. You see, adversity doesn't define you, it reveals you. And what's been revealed now is beauty in the struggle, dignity in the dust, grace in the grind, and unrelenting strength when all else crumbles. Faith doesn't flee the fire, it walks through it. That's not just a sentence. That's a reality etched into the hearts of the faithful. That's a truth that's been proven not in books, not in words, but in the footsteps of those who dared to keep walking when the ground itself gave way beneath them. Because real faith doesn't panic in chaos. It doesn't shiver in the shadow of fear. It doesn't run from the fire. It enters it, head held high, eyes fixed on the one who controls all things. And that's what we've seen. In a time when any ordinary person would have crumbled, when most would have turned their backs, when the flames rose high and the air filled with smoke, they walked forward, calm, steady, unshaken. That's not weakness pretending to be strength. That's real strength, the kind only born through connection to something higher than pain, deeper than loss, greater than fear. Because fire exposes what's fake. It melts the masks. It burns away the shallow. But faith is refined in fire. Faith grows in the heat. Faith needs the fire to show its worth. It doesn't avoid trials. It embraces them. Not because it loves pain, but because it knows what lies on the other side. It knows the fire is not the end. It's the process. When the missiles came, when the world was set ablaze, it wasn't strategy or science that carried them through. It was belief. Belief that no matter how hot the fire, they were never alone in it. Belief that there's a promise greater than the pain. That every trial is a test. That every moment of suffering, every drop of sweat, every silent tear, it all matters. It all counts. The fire makes people ask questions. Why now? Why this? But faith, real faith, doesn't always need answers. Sometimes it just needs a purpose. And that's the difference. That's why they stood. Because they weren't waiting for life to get easier. They weren't begging for comfort. They were walking with conviction, knowing that even if they had nothing left in this world, they still had everything. Because when your soul is lit with faith, no fire can consume you. You can throw a person into the flames, but if their heart burns brighter than the fire around them, then they're already victorious. They may walk through smoke, they may breathe in the ashes, but they keep stepping, one foot in front of the other, not out of blind habit, but out of deliberate trust, because they know the one who controls the fire walks beside them. He sees, he hears, and he never wastes a single moment of their sacrifice. That's what separates the fragile from the faithful. You see, some people treat faith like a decoration, something to wear when things are easy. But others, they carry it like armor. They live it, breathe it, and when the heat comes, and oh, it will come, they don't drop it. They don't throw it away. They hold it tighter. They step into the fire, knowing that this is where legends are made. This is where stories are born. Not fairy tales, but real stories of courage, of strength, of spiritual power that no one can explain. And when you walk through that fire, and you come out the other side, not bitter, but better, that's when the world takes notice. That's when people stop and say, what are they made of? That's when they realize this isn't just stubbornness or blind hope. This is divine trust. This is ironclad belief. This is the kind of faith that echoes across time. They didn't run. They didn't hide. They walked straight into the storm, through the blaze, with the name of God on their lips and peace in their hearts. And here's the truth. Every fire they walked through only made them stronger. Every trial refined their spirit. Every step they took was a slap in the face of despair, because they knew something the world is just now beginning to understand. That faith is not fragile. It is not soft. It is not silent. It is fierce. It is focused. It is fireproof. They didn't just survive the flames. They owned them. Resilience is louder than rockets. You hear that? Because in the middle of the thunder and chaos, in the middle of the sirens and bombs, something even louder was ringing through the smoke. Something more powerful than any explosion. Something that couldn't be recorded by a microphone, but felt in the chest of every witness across the world. It was resilience, a soundless roar, a mighty silence, the unshakable will of a people who refuse to be broken. Rockets tear through buildings, but resilience. Resilience tears through fear. You can launch all the missiles you want, shatter windows, crush walls, even level cities, but you still can't silence the will of someone who refuses to quit. That's what was seen. That's what stunned the world. Not the weapons, not the destruction. It was the ones who stood in the ruins with fire in their eyes and faith in their hearts. It was the mothers cooking over broken stoves, the children writing homework by candlelight, the fathers clearing rubble with their bare hands, the elders calling for prayer in the middle of falling ash. That's louder than anything an army can fire. That's the sound of resilience. And it speaks without saying a word. The world thought the missiles would define the moment. But they were wrong, because the real story wasn't in the destruction. It was in the defiance. How do you measure strength? It's not in muscle. It's not in money. It's not in weaponry. You measure strength by what it takes to break someone. And these people, they didn't break. They stood up each morning, not knowing if they'd see the sunset. They slept through the sound of jets and woke up to shattered glass. And yet they smiled, they shared, they prayed, they lived. That is louder than rockets. That is the sound of human will pushing back against darkness with nothing but belief and courage. The world has seen war, but this was a lesson in unyielding humanity. Rockets come to intimidate. They come to scream power. But the people who stood in front of them said, without ever speaking, "You will not define us." The noise of war was loud, but it could never drown out the quiet dignity of those who walked through it with their heads held high. Resilience is not the absence of pain. It's the ability to carry pain with pride. It's the strength to look at loss, to look at destruction, to look at everything taken away, and still choose to live, still choose to serve, still choose to believe. And that's what echoed louder than any bomb. The world didn't just see destruction, it saw hope refusing to die. You see, you can't destroy people who've already surrendered to something greater than this world. You can't break people who don't tie their strength to comfort. You can't intimidate hearts that beat for something eternal. That's what the rockets couldn't reach. That's what they couldn't crush. And that's why the noise of weapons, the thunder of violence, the roar of war, it all fell silent in the presence of true resilience. When the bombs stopped falling, It wasn't the silence that lingered. It was the memory of those who kept standing, the images of worshippers bowing in prayer amid rubble, the sight of a child laughing in a shelter, the sound of the adhan echoing through broken streets. That's what will echo through time. That's what will be remembered. Rockets are loud, but short-lived. Resilience. It echoes for generations. And here's the part the world didn't expect. That the people who suffered the most became the strongest voices. They didn't just endure. They inspired. They didn't just survive. They shook the very foundations of global conscience. The world looked at them and saw something unexplainable, something divine, a strength that didn't come from this earth. And that strength said more than any speech, any protest, any argument ever could. Because when your spirit is resilient, you become the loudest voice in the room, even if you never speak, even if you stand in silence, even if all you do is keep going. That's why rockets will never win, because they speak in fear. But resilience speaks in power. And when it speaks, the whole world listens. You said dignity is not taken, it is chosen. Let that sit with you for a moment. Because the world has tried again and again to strip people of their worth, to rob them of their image, to define them by circumstance, to paint them as victims, as broken, as powerless. But the truth is, you can take away a person's home, their land, their wealth, even their life. But you can never take away their dignity unless they give it to you. And what the world witnessed was a people who refused to give it up. Dignity is not in clothes. It's not in titles. It's not in status. It's not how you look or where you live. Dignity is in how you carry yourself when everything around you has collapsed. It's in the decisions you make when no one is watching. It's in the words you speak when the world is against you. It's in the way you bow your head in prayer, not in defeat, but in devotion, even while missiles fall. That's what the world saw. A people walking through rubble with their backs straight, their eyes calm, their faith unwavering. They weren't begging for sympathy. They weren't pleading for validation. They were living their truth in the face of injustice, in the middle of suffering, with dignity no bomb could erase. Because here's what the enemy didn't expect, that even after everything was taken, they would still choose how to respond, and they responded with grace, with discipline, with faith, with restraint, with humanity. They responded with a strength that can't be explained by logic. Because dignity is not weakness pretending to be strong. It is strength mastered through patience. They chose dignity when it would have been easier to give in to anger. They chose it when the world labeled them as broken. They chose it when they buried their children and wiped their tears with trembling hands and still whispered, Alhamdulillah. That's not surrender. That's supremacy of the soul. That's power of a kind that bullets can't touch. Understand something. The world is full of people with power, but very few with dignity. Dignity is the decision to remain honorable, even when dishonor surrounds you. It's the quiet refusal to let pain make you bitter, or hate make you blind. It's what makes a mother hold her child tighter, not with fear, but with pride, even if all she has left is the warmth of her own arms. It's what makes a father teach his son how to pray before teaching him how to fight, because he knows real strength starts in the heart. Dignity is not loud. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't demand attention. But when it enters a room or rises from the dust of a war zone, the world feels it. The world stops. The world listens. And that's what happened. They tried to silence these people with destruction, but instead they taught the world a lesson in honor, a lesson in choosing humanity over hate, a lesson in refusing to let victimhood define you. That's why their faces, their voices, their stories, they're etched into the conscience of humanity now. Because even as they stood in the darkest of nights, they shined. That light wasn't in their hands. It was in their souls. It was in the decision to live with principle, to walk with grace, to suffer without becoming cruel. That's a choice. That's the power of dignity. It doesn't rise from what you have, but from what you believe. They didn't curse the world. They didn't burn with rage. They held their heads high and said, "We know who we are, and you can't take that from us." That right there is dignity. The kind that makes tyrants nervous. The kind that turns oppressed people into heroes. The kind that moves history forward. And that's what we're seeing now. History being moved not by missiles, but by the dignity of a people who refuse to be defined by anything less than their own values, their own strength, their own faith. Because dignity is not handed to you. It is not granted by the world. It is something you choose. And once you choose it, no one can ever take it away. You said, "They tried to bury us, but we are seeds." They thought it was over. They thought if they pushed us down hard enough, long enough, deep enough, we'd disappear, that we'd stop growing, that we'd suffocate in silence, that if they erased our homes, our stories, our names, they'd erase our future. But they didn't know. They forgot something. They forgot what happens when you plant a seed. Because a seed doesn't die in the dirt. It transforms. You see, the dirt was never our grave. It was our womb. The darkness wasn't our end. It was our beginning. Every time they tried to bury us, we grew stronger roots. Every time they tried to silence our voice, our message grew louder. Every time they tried to break us, we became harder to bend. They buried us, yes, but in doing so, they planted a movement they cannot stop. Because seeds rise, slowly, quietly, but surely. They rise through the mud. They rise through the pressure. They rise through the cold, through the weight, through the silence. And then one day, they break the surface. They pierce through with life, with color, with light. And that's what's happening right now. The world is watching something bloom from beneath the rubble. A people who have endured the worst, but chosen to become the best version of themselves in spite of it. A generation not born in peace, but born in purpose. They tried to bury our identity. They tried to erase our faith, our culture, our values. But what they didn't know is that what's planted in belief cannot be uprooted by hate. What's grounded in faith cannot be shaken by force. You can't destroy a seed whose roots are deep in conviction. You can't stop growth that was written by the hand of the Almighty Himself. They tried to bury our dignity, but all they did was nourish our courage. They tried to bury our voice, but all they did was teach us how to speak with action. They tried to bury our future, but all they did was ignite a fire in the hearts of our children that no generation before has ever known. Because every time they tried to shut the door, we built another one. Every time they tried to silence the page, we wrote a new chapter with our lives. Every time they tried to cut the branches, we learned to grow sideways, outward, upward, any way we could. That's resilience. That's what happens when a people have purpose in their soul and prayer on their lips. They thought they were planting destruction. What they didn't realize is they planted a forest. Now, everywhere you look, voices are rising. Stories are being told. Truth is spreading like light through cracks in a wall. And even those who once turned their backs, they're turning back around, asking, how did they survive that? And the answer is simple. We weren't buried to die. We were planted to rise, because a seed needs darkness. A seed needs pressure. A seed needs patience. Just like a people who've been through war, through exile, through heartbreak, and still get up, still smile, still serve. They've been trained by the struggle. They've been prepared by the pain. And now they're rising with wisdom that couldn't be taught in books, with strength that couldn't be sculpted in comfort, with unity that wasn't handed down, but earned. They tried to bury us in labels. They called us refugees, victims, statistics. But we reclaimed our names. We stood up, shook off the dirt, and said, we are more than what they did to us. We are more than the bombs, more than the ruins, more than the headlines. We are believers. We are builders. We are seeds that were made to grow. And you better believe, once a seed starts growing, nothing can stop it. The world thought it was witnessing an ending, but what it's really seeing is a beginning, a rebirth, a revival, a generation rising not just to survive, but to thrive, not just to endure, but to lead. Because you can't keep a seed down forever. You can't hold back a people whose roots are deep in hope, in faith, in sacrifice. They tried to bury us, but they planted a revolution. They planted a movement of souls who will not quit, will not bow, will not break, because we are seeds, and we were born to rise. And now, as we close this message, let the world remember this truth. When the sky darkened with war, when missiles screamed down from above, when cities crumbled and voices were drowned in sirens, there was a people who did not bow, who did not beg, who did not break. They stood unshaken. They stood with their hands raised in prayer, not in surrender. They stood with their faith burning brighter than any explosion. They stood with their heads high, not in pride, but in purpose. What we witnessed wasn't just resistance. It wasn't just survival. It was something greater. It was a revelation, a reminder, a warning, a proof that no matter how hard the world tries to define Muslims by fear, by lies, by violence, they continue to be defined by their unwavering faith, their sacred dignity, their resilience, and their trust in the Almighty. In those darkest nights, we saw the brightest light. In the shattered streets, we saw living proof of patience. In every displaced child, every praying mother, every fearless elder, we saw an entire Ummah carry centuries of strength forward. This wasn't just a tragedy. This was a testimony, a declaration carved not in ink, but in pain. And the message rang loud and clear. This is what Muslims are made of. They are not defined by the bombs that fell, but by how they rose afterward, not by what they lost, but by what they never let go of, their belief, their honor, their identity, their unwavering grip on the rope of their Creator. That is the strength the world was forced to see. That is the story that rose above the smoke. Because this isn't just about one city, one country, or one moment in time. This is about a global awakening, a reminder to every soul watching from afar that you do not need a perfect life to live with purpose. You do not need to be free from hardship to carry yourself with honor, and you do not need the approval of the world to walk in truth. You only need one thing: faith. Real faith. The kind that doesn't depend on outcomes. The kind that doesn't shake in storms. The kind that doesn't quit when everything is stripped away. That is the legacy Muslims are building brick by brick, heart by heart, prayer by prayer. Every tragedy has a choice to become a tombstone or a milestone. And the Muslims who stood unshaken chose the second. They turned loss into legacy. They turned fire into fuel. And now, every corner of the world is bearing witness to their rise, not just in power, but in presence, in principle, in purpose. What was meant to crush them became their crown. What was meant to bury them became their soil for growth. They rose not with weapons, but with worship. They stood not with rage, but with righteousness. And they walked not to impress the world, but to please the one above it. That's the power the world wasn't ready for, but now it's here. Now it's undeniable. Now it's unforgettable. Let it echo through time that when missiles fell, they didn't scatter in fear. They came together in unity. Let it be written in history that when bombs shattered buildings, they didn't fall apart. They held each other closer. Let it be remembered that when the night tried to consume them, they lit the sky with the fire of faith. And let every oppressor be reminded that while you may strike the body, you cannot touch the soul of a believer. So to every Muslim who stood tall while the world watched you suffer, know this: you have already won. Not because the battle is over, but because your spirit never left the field. You've shown the world what it means to carry truth through pain, what it means to speak hope in hopelessness, what it means to be unshaken. The question now is not, what are Muslims made of? The world already knows. The real question is, are we ready to rise with them? To carry the banner of faith, of honor, of courage into every corner of our own lives. Because the legacy is not finished. The story is still being written, and the next chapter is up to us. So walk boldly, speak truthfully, pray deeply, and never forget. They tried to break you, but you broke through. They tried to bury you, but you grew. They tried to silence you, but now the world listens. As missiles fell, you stood unshaken. And now, the world will never forget what Muslims are made of.